Let's have a conversation about justice. And in the entire justice ecosystem, there are those that are happy because they seek and get justice. There are those that remain unhappy because they seek and they don't get justice. And then there are those who are still just not even aware of what's going to happen because they have sought and they have not yet gotten their justice for reasons that we shall hear about. It's an issue about delayed justice and what delayed justice is all about. What delayed justice then means to the person who's seeking justice. And what delayed justice means to an entire society. When you have a system that does not give you justice as fast as you should receive justice, what does that do to the society as a whole? To join us in this conversation are two officials from the International Justice Missions. One of them is Vincent Chahale. He's a Senior Manager, Justice System Interventions. He joins us in the studio. Good morning, Vincent.
Good morning, Latif.
Good to have you in the studio. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
Normally, the other seat that is here is usually the hot seat. This one is the hotter seat for guests, special guests such as yourself. We hope that you'll have a fairly good time here. The other guest that joins us on the line, and her name is Pina Ercolano. She is a program attorney for Justice System Interventions at the International Justice Missions. Pina, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show as well. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
I guess I just want to start with you, Vincent. What does International Justice Missions do? Who are you? What do you do? Where do you do it? And for how long have you been doing it?
International Justice Mission is a non-governmental organization resident in Kenya and other 10 countries. We seek to protect the vulnerable in society from violence by helping them access justice. That is what we do. We are stationed here in Nairobi. Presently, we have two programs running. One is we do a program on police abuse of power here in Nairobi and its environs. And we also have a program that we started in the coastal region that deals with the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Basically, what we do is to help the vulnerable in society access justice.
Right. So there are many cases where people would find themselves in that entire justice system. They are seeking justice, but for some reason, it takes long. So you have gone to court, the case takes long to develop before the judgment and the ruling is made. In some cases, you are lucky to be out on bond. Well, there's still some property of yours that's attached. In some cases, you are in remand for the entire duration of time. How do you help such people?
Well, one, we seek to help those we believe are innocent in the first instance. In the second instance, we help the families of the victims of the perpetrators of crimes. So what we do is that we give legal representation to those we believe are innocent for one reason or another, and we have our own investigations that we do before we engage in that. But then also we realize that where we have victims, for example, where a person is killed, then we will represent the family so that we make sure that the interests of the family, because they want to see justice, but they might not be able to access justice if they can't afford legal representation. So we represent those families and help them access justice.
Okay. Last week we had a conversation, interestingly enough, on Friday, and we hear that, quite a number of people in prisons, in remand, for petty crimes, right? They have not been able to have trial because one of the main reasons being that they cannot afford legal representation. I think that ties in with exactly what you've just said. But then also maybe we can go to you, Pina, and ask that, all right, so we are seeing many people stuck in jail, in prison, in remand because they're unable to access legal representation. Now, is this one of the issues, and how can it be dealt with? Because if we say justice delayed is justice denied, but they end up being stuck in the system for a very, very long time. How then are we able to provide kind of interventions for them? And how has it been over the years?
Yes, indeed. Justice delayed is justice denied. In fact, excuse me, the ODPP had conducted a remand review back in 2018. And one of the things that they did was they went around to prisons and they checked, they had a look at remand prisons, that is, and they looked at the type of offenses and the reasons why people were there. And they discovered exactly what you've said, is that a lot of people had been in remand for petty offenses, for offenses that didn't warrant anything more than 6 months in prison or a fine. And the sadness of which was that they had been in remand for even a longer period of time. So the ODPP embarked on a journey, which we actually started with them in 2016, where we had worked alongside them to do a baseline study where we looked at how they make the decision to charge. We did a case review where we looked at a few files in a few stations around the country together with ODPP. We interviewed prosecutors and magistrates. And when we did that, we discovered that there were issues concerning the making of the decision to charge, where police officers would bring files or charge sheets, and the files didn't have sufficient evidence. So a lot of the cases that we reviewed actually did not have sufficient evidence to charge those people. And of course, once again, what was discovered was that a lot of the offenses were actually petty offenses, right? So the DPP appointed a task force in 2018 to create the decision to charge guidelines, which were actually drafted and launched last year in July. The aim of which is to assist prosecutors in making the decision to charge. And there's a decision to charge which requires a prosecutor to look at the file that's brought to them, look at the evidence, and make a decision as to whether that case warrants or that suspect should be charged, right, based on the evidence before them. If there isn't sufficient evidence, they work together with the investigator to be able to get the evidence required, or if not, then they make the decision not to charge. That's one of the ways of clearing the amount of people who are going through the justice system, of course. The other thing that ODPP have done is they launched the guidelines for plea bargaining, diversion, and they're also using alternatives to prosecution. This is all an effort to clear, these petty offenses from going into the criminal justice system. Juvenile offenders, they'll be recommended for diversion, which is fantastic. Something that we had collaborated with ODPP with is we went to Lamu in 2019 to do the same thing, the review of the Remand prisons, and we found a lot of people there had been drug users. And so instead of charging them, diversion was considered to send them to a Red Cross center that was actually launched during that time we were there for such offenders. So using these means, alternative means of justice, has become more and more popular. And even the judiciary has launched guidelines on the same, of using traditional dispute mechanisms, which is fantastic.
There are cases, Pina, where in the pursuit of justice, the systems, the prosecutor, the police, and then the prosecutor would end up committing some injustice. So, for instance, there's a particular case where people are arrested en masse in this particular office, and you're all taken to a police station. You spend a weekend in a police station, and then come Tuesday, the prosecutor decides, okay, I'm just going to charge the two of you. These other three, I'm not going to charge. But you see, this person has spent 3 days, 4 days in police custody. And the first time the police came to court, they said, we'd like some more time to hold them as we conduct our investigations. Now, do you have ways of helping such people? Because the person to whom an injustice has been committed, I had absolutely nothing to do with the crime being taken to court, yet I spent time behind bars. Is there any way of such people getting their own justice?
For the people who have been arrested?
Yes. I'll give you an example. There's a time when last year we actually spoke about this for a while. There was a media story about child trafficking and children being sold. Some officers from Mama Lucy were arrested and taken to police custody. Then they were taken to court on the first day, and police requested for more time to hold them as they conduct investigations. And the next time when they go to court, some of them were released because the prosecutor said, I have actually nothing against such and such officers. This ones can go home. I have a case to commence on these remaining officers. Now, the ones that have spent a weekend in police cells, and then the prosecutor just comes and casually says, no, by the way, I had nothing against you. What do you do to those?
So on the criminal justice sector side, the first thing that ODPP, NPS are trying to address is sensitization, and something that we've worked alongside IPOA, IAU, and NPS has been sensitizing police officers, training them on investigations so that when they are arresting such people, they have sufficient evidence, of course. So that is from the one side. On the other side of the part of the victim, there are ways to be able to still engage the justice system and actually going forward and saying that they were maliciously prosecuted or they were arrested without having any evidence. So there are ways to be able to address this, and people are compensated for such things. But of course, the bigger issue needs to be dealt with, which is we need to make sure that when people are being arrested, there is sufficient evidence showing that, they are suspected of a crime and they should be there, and that is the bigger issue here, rather than further clouding the justice system or creating an even bigger backlog by having people file claims against the state. I think that is the bigger issue that we should deal with.
Vincent, so currently there are major judicial issues right now with people who have yet to stand trial for some would-be crimes, would-be charges. What is the call right now? There are cases that have not been heard for the last 3-4 years currently that are obviously having a burden on the system, that are having a burden on the families who are waiting for this justice then to be expended, that those who are waiting to know what their fate will be. What is the cry today to say, can we move these along? So many things have come about that have compounded the situations. But what are we asking today that needs to be done?
Well, we must first strengthen our criminal justice system. Just to give an illustration, right now, the staff establishment of the judiciary requires them to have about 9,300 employees, including judicial officers and judges. Right now, they have slightly above 5,000, which means they're operating at slightly above 50%. This definitely puts a lot of strain on the judiciary because day by day, cases keep increasing. We have emerging frontiers of crimes. For example, technology has come with new frontiers of crimes. So crimes keep on increasing. So one is that we must strengthen our system, our criminal justice system. We must strengthen our judiciary. We must strengthen our law enforcement agencies so that we have investigations, quality investigations that can sustain convictions and that can enable speedy trials. But beyond even the criminal justice system, in my view, one of the things that is creating this unfortunate and sad scenario is our degradation of the value system. In this sense, our value system, which has over the years and over the decades degraded, has increased crime. There were times in the history of this nation when, assuming, just to give an illustration, assuming you were traveling and you had a lot of luggage, you could leave it by the side of the road and go and get somebody to come and help you carry. Right now, you cannot do that. In fact, you'd be considered foolish to do that. Why? Because our value system has degraded, which means then that crime has to inevitably go up, which means, therefore, that we have to spend a lot to get justice because we have to employ more judges, we have to employ more magistrates, and we have to spend more resources so that we can bring a case to conclusion. Look at it this way. You can imagine a murder case, for example. From the time the offense is committed, a lot of resources and time is spent in investigations, then prosecution, Then the case delays for about 9 years, and we've had cases, even prominent cases, which were in the public limelight, which are still pending litigation. Mm-hmm. You will remember the Venezuelan ambassador, for example, who was murdered in 2012. That case is still pending, yet it had a lot of public limelight. So you can imagine the amount of resources and time that is being spent to realize justice. And so we must have a national conversation on this. Look at our value system, look at our criminal justice system, see how can we strengthen it, answer the big questions, how can we make justice move speedily. At the same time, we must take into account the effect that the whole of this process has on victims. Because you can imagine a family that lost a son, a father, and they have to wait for 9-10 years before they get justice. And sometimes they might not even get, because with a fraction of time, then it means that the quality of evidence that is brought before the court is affected, because people forget things, And so it's a conversation that we need to have, a national conversation, and see how do we help the whole sector, criminal justice system. But then more importantly, how do we improve as a society so that we have less crimes?
How do we improve as a society? And I think that's one of the very big questions, is that there are certain things that you cannot legislate on, that you cannot force one or another individual to behave in a certain manner, which one would say is morally upright or not. So it becomes a very sticky situation, because here you are saying, you know what, we don't have the resources to be able to hire enough when it comes to judicial and legal officers as a state. But at the same time that you're seeing there's moral degradation, as you have said, what is the nexus of all of this to say, okay, how do we legislate and say, please, folks, essentially moralize? Because on this other hand, we're not able to keep up with this.
It's more and more expensive to
Right.
actually finance that end than maybe to finance the beginning, where it's looking at working on the moral system and the moral fabric of the society. How do you make people just feel that it's easier for us, it's better for all of us if we behaved in a certain way? Maybe that's it's gonna cost you less, but it's gonna take you more time. In the room this morning is Eric Latif, Ndu Okos, CT Muga, and Vincent Chahale. He's a senior manager, Justice System Interventions at the International Justice Missions. And joining us on the line is Pina Ercolano, who's a program attorney for Justice System Interventions at the same organization, International Justice Missions. Before we took the break, Vincent, Ndu had asked you, you had explained what we need to do to get there. We need to look at our justice, improving the entire justice system and ecosystem, and then also looking at ourselves as a society and what we need to do. And I think Ndu had asked you, so how do we get there? How do we do all these things? What do we need to do? Where do we need to start?
Yes. First, I think we need to start by looking at the criminal justice system, the judiciary. One, we need to improve the physical infrastructure of the judiciary. Right now, we have stations within the judiciary where you find a station that has 5 magistrates, yet the courts are 3. So it means that 2 magistrates have to wait. They have to have alternate days when they can access the courts. And so they have to deal only with matters that they can deal with in chambers on these other days. So we have to improve the physical infrastructure. The former Chief Justice had said that he would want to see a high court in each and every county and a magistrate's court in each and every sub-county. It's a vision that probably the new Chief Justice needs to pick up because that would make it much easier. Then we need to strengthen our oversight agencies. And the first oversight agency, the supreme one, is Parliament. I tend to feel as though Parliament relaxes at times. For example, when you're having when the cohesion is not there between the executive and the judiciary, then it is Parliament to come in and try and bridge that gap. Because when we have instances where the executive and the judiciary are not working in harmony, then it means the effect will be felt on the criminal justice system. So
you want to strengthen Parliament?
No. I said that we want to strengthen oversight systems, oversight institutions.
And the example you gave is Parliament.
And yes, Parliament is an oversight. It's the supreme oversight institution.
Is there another institution we can refer to outside Parliament?
Yes.
Which one?
Civil society.
Okay,
is
because
an institution.
Citizens.
I'm asking this because if I look at the track record of our Parliament when it comes to oversight, with specific reference to our love for borrowing and choosing really genuinely expensive loans, if they have failed in that one small thing, something which is patently clear, can we actually rely on them to actually provide oversight on something as serious as the law, the practice of it?
It's their constitutional duty. So,
Yes, it
so,
is.
so
Do they know that?
How I view it is this: the fact that they have not performed does not mean we should not put them to task to perform. It is our civic duty to put them to task, and it starts by the leaders that we elect. So we still have to push on, even if there are those who feel that they've not done their bit. We still have to push on. We can't say that we now have to look for other institutions because they're the
this one
ones
has
who have
failed.
the constitutional duty.
You know, with
to do that.
Parliament, it's not that they haven't done their bit. They have failed dismally.
Well, maybe that's a different conversation, which
Yes.
I wouldn't then want to get into.
Yes.
Perhaps
But
maybe we could ask it this way, because you said strengthen the oversight agencies, and with the example of Parliament, what do we need to do to strengthen Parliament? What do you have in mind?
what I have in mind is petitioning Parliament when issues arise within the justice system. I'll give you an example. We have court awards running into billions of shillings. We have people who are waiting for their awards from government. They had their judgments 10 years ago. Yeah, it is something that as members of the public, we should petition Parliament to intervene and even allocate money for that.
Yeah.
Because it has a drastic effect when somebody waits for the fruits of his judgment and he cannot enjoy them.
So it's calling for accountability on the oversight agencies.
That's
because
right.
I think when you say strengthen, it's like, we give them more money, we give them more power. They have so much power, these people, so much money. Maybe it's just for us to put them in check, and citizens demanding accountability on the oversight agencies that they have put to ensure that these things work. Correct?
Right, I would agree with you on that.
Okay. Those are the 2 points that you had said. I think you had another point on what we need to do to get there to improve our systems.
Yes. We also need to invest quite a lot in technology. Right now, we've seen during the pandemic, the judiciary, for example, you can file cases online. You can file civil cases online and make applications online, and even some applications can be had online. Though this is just within Nairobi and its environs, then we need to invest more in technology by making all courts in Kenya, making the citizens being able to file applications and suits online. It would help a lot. It also takes a lot of judicial time when the judges and magistrates have to record the proceedings by hand. So we should improve in terms of stenographers and all that. I know some little effort has been made towards this end, but we should see how to hasten to make proceedings move even faster. So those are some of the things we can do.
I have two to add on to what you're saying, and I think they're critical, especially when you're talking about this delayed justice. One of them, in my opinion, is the investigative agencies, and ensuring that we completely and fully equip our police service and our DCI so that they are bringing the right suspects into the system, so that the people who they need to protect are also getting the protection. Because if the police then are not well equipped, if the police don't have the equipment that they need to conduct swift and thorough investigations, then that's how you end up with 10 people facing one charge, and the police are not exactly sure who exactly they should be charging. And then the DPP as well, with all the work that has been done in the office of the DPP, maybe is there anything more that needs to be done to the office of the DPP to ensure that the prosecutions commence on time? That when they receive the files from the investigative agencies, the EACC, the DCI, and the others, they act swiftly so that the prosecution starts on time.
Well, I agree with what you've said, and maybe I can add this. One, I think that looking at the whole criminal justice system chain, the office that I would commend for having made a lot of strides actually is the office of the ODPP. Since it was severed from the Attorney General's office, there have been a lot of improvements, and they've taken over all the prosecutions, as opposed to a situation where we used to have police prosecute some cases. And there have been a lot that has been done. When we talk about the police, I think for me, emphasis should be laid upon training, because looking at the history of the police in Kenya, more emphasis is laid on physical attributes as opposed to technical attributes. Yet, as crime evolves, it becomes more complex. You will remember anytime there are recruitments, you'll see people running around a field. Some are told to open their mouth. If you're found with a missing tooth, you do not qualify, as if one of the job descriptions is to go and bite. Yet, what we need to invest in more is the technical aspect, because they are going to deal with criminals who use technology, for example. Look at investigation of cases like corruption cases. They are very complex. They require a lot of learning. So we need to invest that in terms of the police. Of course, also what you said about adding them resources and modern equipments for investigations.
Something I'd like to ask. I mean, even as I listen to what you're saying, and I actually agree with you, the thinking behind it is sound. Does our constitution give us the leeway to actually build, create, strengthen alternate mechanisms for resolving some of these issues that eventually end up in our courts? Because when you talk about people who are in our prison system, the vast majority are not these hardcore criminals and murderers and the people you sort of like feel these ones actually need to be here. Can some of these things not be resolved by other mechanisms? I know there's mediation, there's arbitration. How strengthened is this? Is it possible to have, say, for instance, authorities like the chiefs resolving some of these issues? I mean, is it possible to cascade it so that many of the things that actually end up even within the magistrates' court don't even end up there, that they are actually resolved so that you lighten the burden? Because investing into the system, as you say, yes, that's a good plan. But what about something that perhaps is not as cost demanding as some of the suggestions you've made? Is it possible?
Well, we did first segregate things here. One, we have civil disputes and we have criminal disputes. In criminal disputes, it is a crime against the state. That's why if you assault me, it will be the republic versus you. Yeah, and so we would not encourage, in my view, settlement of criminal disputes outside the judicial system. Okay. What we need to do towards that end is perhaps create more petty crime courts where such petty crimes can be dealt with speedily, and also rely on non-custodial sentences. Actually, I was, some years back, I was a member of the Judiciary Task Force on Sentencing, where we suggested that we should place more reliance on non-custodial sentences so that we don't overcrowd the prisons with people with petty offenses. However, when it comes to civil disputes, then we can invest more in mediation. Right now, there is a court-warranted mediation, and there are mediators, trained mediators, who are assisting the courts, and it's doing very well in resolving civil disputes. So we should then differentiate the two systems that way. But I think more investment in petty crimes courts and reliance on non-custodial sentences would help decongest the prisons, for example, and it would help speedy trials.
And why has this not been done? Because you clearly understand it and you know what needs to be done.
I wish I had the power to do it. I would do it very fast. Well, it takes, we are improving day by day. I think where the Kenyan justice system is now may not be where it was 20 years ago. But certainly, I think we should lay more importance to it and invest more money. It doesn't help, for example, I think it was about 2 years ago, when the development budget of the judiciary was 50 million. What can they do with 50 million? So we need to invest more resources in the judiciary, even as we deal with other issues that are beyond the criminal justice system. Because I also feel that, for example, it is not fair to a society for it to spend so much money, for example, in fighting corruption. We give EACC about 1 billion shillings every year. That can be used to do so many other things. If we just stop being corrupt, it's that simple. We can just stop being corrupt and you spend less in fighting corruption, and that money goes to do other things.
You sound like you would wave a wand and just say, well, you know what, Kenya, it's now time for you for individuals to stop being corrupt, and at the wave of the wand, everybody would stop. And this is what I was saying. It is extremely difficult, and I think that's why people don't do it, to legislate on morality. You cannot ask people, well, you can, but will they stop? Then now you are dealing with the choice and character of an individual, to which you cannot go then and apply the law.
Yes, and that's why I'm saying that we have to go beyond the law. How do we inculcate a culture? How do we raise our children? How do we raise our youth that they have certain values, that they would not engage in certain acts like crime? How do we do it? It's a conversation that we need to have. But at the same time, that does not mean that we don't punish those who have offended, because you see, as one of the theories of punishment is to cause deterrence.
Right.
So we must punish those who have done offensive
Can
acts.
I ask you a question which is pertinent, because we're talking about behavior change now? Okay, it's to both of you. This organization that you work with, do you have, this is a favorite question of mine, do you have a program that works with school children, universities? Because if you are talking about a system and getting people to understand these dire ramifications, the law, the practice of it, the implications, you understand it well. Don't you think it would actually serve us even better if we started doing this thing when people are much younger, so that it's part and parcel of the way they live, as opposed to encountering the law the first time a policeman stops you?
That's right.
Yes.
Once you've gone afoul. Let's see. Pina, you can start.
Yes, I think even just to add on to what Vincent has been saying is, once the criminal justice system is strengthened, it actually deters people from committing crimes, and you will find that the crime rates are going down, because you realize, I can't get away with this crime. Whereas currently, you kind of have this inkling of the devil on your shoulder. You're like, I could probably get away with this. But in terms of what we've been doing, we have been working with justice centers. We haven't been working directly with children in school. We have been working with universities, especially with the moot court debates. In fact, we just did one recently. We collaborated with the All Kenyan Moot Court competition. But we do work with justice centers. There are a few justice centers. We have about 5 that we work with, and we strengthen them. We actually do capacity building. Last year, we did a paralegal training where we trained them on everything from criminal law, civil, including employment, everything, the Constitution, because these justice systems have been the first point of call for a lot of people in the informal settlements. It has become so key for them. They go there and they'll get legal advice. What do I do when this happens? The person at the justice center is able to tell them where to go and what to do. Even referring them to the chief, like you said, one of the things the judiciary is doing is actually enforcing other traditional dispute mechanisms, which is actually in the Constitution, which is go to your chief, talk this through, so that you don't have, like someone very close to me recently got charged with a case of causing a disturbance because they had a small fight with their neighbor, and then the neighbor rushed off to court. And this friend of mine gets arrested in the middle of the night in front of their children for this small offense and spends 2 nights in jail. So, some of these things, they can be settled by the chief. You go to the chief, if, for example, the time when the police officer received this complaint, they should have said, have you spoken to the chief? Have you sat down and tried to figure out how to get a way forward without having to go into the criminal justice system? Because this will take a while and we should be dealing with other cases, to be very honest, So there are things that are being done out there by the judiciary, by ODPP, and even capacity building from the grassroots with justice centers. And of course, accountability. Just as you've been saying, we need to hold all of our state actors accountable.
You'd also talked about earlier, you'd mentioned among the things that are happening is that alternative to prosecution, and you gave the example of a case in Lamu. What does that mean? Is it that you will not be taken to court? You will then be charged locally? Explain. How is this working?
So, for example, for diversion, so if you have, let's take Lamu as an example. There are a lot of people who are in prison for using drugs, right?
Yeah.
But the core issue for them was that they're drug addicts. So what is the solution? They need to go into rehab, not to go into prison, because after they do their, or maybe let's say 6 months, because it's probably like a tiny amount that they were caught with, rather than them going back and committing the same offense, because they're still, addicts.
Addicted to drugs, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So instead, they were encouraging. Now what they do is, we've gone through, a prosecutor receives a file. They can see this is a person who has been charged with using drugs. They're in possession of a tiny amount. They're not actually selling. They have the evidence there. They will now recommend for diversion, diverting this case to, for example, now a rehab center, which is what I was saying. They had set up a Red Cross center there. So that's one example. Juveniles as well, doing community service instead of sitting in court. Let's deal with the core issue. Why are you misbehaving? And that's what diversion is all about. Plea bargaining is a bit different, and that's where you've actually been charged for an offense, and you can negotiate with the prosecutor for a lesser sentence or a lesser offense, which has a lesser sentence for a particular reason. For example, you can assist the prosecution or the investigation of the crime. You can be a witness in the particular case because perhaps you are just a bystander or aiding and abetting. So these are some of the things that are being done by ODPP, and that also helps in curbing the current backlog of cases that we have.
I know these solutions that we're talking about, or making them alive to our situation, is not easy. I understand it's not easy, but I'm going back to the question I asked, and because when you have a culture such as the one that has engulfed the nation of this country, where we actually passively watch corruption taking place or participate in it, and we've normalized it. This is something exceptional, but we've normalized it. Those who've already gotten to the age where they can participate in it may be difficult to change, but there are those who haven't gotten to that point. Every time we talk about corruption, we're talking about corruption in almost every sphere of this particular society of ours in Kenya. No one is left out. And when you talk about trying to train people to get to understand the law, sometimes the opposite of what you're trying to achieve is achieved, because someone who understands the law now knows how well to subvert it, because they have a greater knowledge of it than they had before. Now, I have to ask, and I'm asking you now, dealing with young people and getting them to understand at that particular phase in their lives some of the importance of these things so that they can grow up understanding it. Is it something that you think is worthwhile and that should be pursued?
Yes. And what I think is that we should inculcate this knowledge within our curriculum in the schools so that we start this knowledge, we prevent rather than wait after it has been done. And so that then we react. So we should have this knowledge about corruption, studies on its effects, because it has a very wide effect, some which even the perpetrator cannot imagine. And I speak on this authoritatively because in years past, I was a technical committee member of the Presidential Task Force on Anti-Corruption. And one of the suggestions that were made was that with time, a curriculum on anti-corruption should be introduced in schools so that it is taught to people when they are still young. And that's where we even had discussions on the value system, and we looked at the effects of corruption, and it's just unimaginable. It's not just about the money that has been stolen, but the effect is just so wide. So yes, I think what should be done is that we have this growing from a very tender age, even us as adults showing a good example, because also we cannot be thieving and appearing in the news when the children are watching and expect that culture to change. So it's just about how we and that's why I was talking about a national conversation on this and agreeing how do we move forward with this. But yes, I think something can be done. But nonetheless, let us not also trivialize the little efforts that are being done. The fact that we are having this conversation, there is somebody listening, and it can change somebody's perception somewhere. So we'll not also overlook the little things that we can do. I'm reminded of Wangari Maathai, who talked about the little bird that saw a fire in the forest, and it would go and pick some water in its beak and come and pour on the fire. It was doing its bit. So it's our collective responsibility. Let us see in each and every sphere that we are in, what can we do as an individual, as institutions, and as society.
As we conclude, do you take walk-ins, people who maybe have an issue that they'd like assistance with at international justice missions? And then how do you deal with such cases?
Right, yes. So we take references from people. Of course, the walk-ins have been affected by the pandemic.
COVID, yeah.
Yes. But we take references, and what we do is that we screen it because we also don't want to be representing criminals. So we screen the information that we get. We have an investigation arm. So before the matter goes to the legal arm, we do conduct investigations just to be assured that some rights have been violated. And after a rigorous system, then we admit it into the process and we see the means that we can help. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Vincent Chahale is a senior manager, Justice System Interventions at the International Justice Missions, and Pina Ercolano, who is a program attorney at the same institution. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing this information and shedding light on many things that are happening or ought to happen in our criminal justice system.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.